I always knew my sister Lauren cared more about appearances than people, but I never thought she'd humiliate me over it, especially not in front of her entire bridal party. Growing up, Lauren was the golden child, blonde, bright-eyed, always perfectly dressed. I was the smart one, which everyone said like it was some sort of consolation prize. While she got compliments about her hair, her figure, her camera-ready smile, I got told I had a great personality or such a sharp mind. That was the code. Everyone knew it. I learned to live with it. Lauren was the girl who won prom queen. I was the one who helped her pick the dress and then drove our little brother to baseball practice because she had a fitting. She didn't mean to be cruel, at least not then. It was just how she was, wrapped up in her own shine. But over the years, that shine hardened into something darker, and I became invisible in her orbit. Still, I loved her. I defended her. I told myself that sisters tease, they fight, they don't always say the right thing. And when she got engaged to her longtime boyfriend Ryan, I was genuinely happy for her. I even offered to help plan the wedding, thinking maybe it would bring us closer. Maybe we'd finally have those warm moments other sisters shared. Fitting dresses together, late-night calls about centerpieces and bridal shower themes. At first, she said yes. She even made me maid of honor. I started putting together Pinterest boards, researching venues, booking appointments. I was all in. Until the day everything shattered. It was a sunny Thursday, 2 months before the wedding, when she invited me to brunch with her bridesmaids. We met at this overly expensive rooftop cafe where everything looked like it had been designed for Instagram. I had worn a soft mauve dress, nothing flashy, just elegant, and even curled my hair, which I rarely did. I wanted to feel like I belonged beside them. Her bridesmaids were all thin, glowing, and obnoxiously perfect. Models, influencers, or yoga instructors from what I could tell. They laughed too loud, sipped tiny oat milk lattes, and glanced at me like I was an exhibit in a museum they didn't quite understand. Halfway through the meal, Lauren clinked her mimosa glass and said, "Okay, ladies, so I've made some adjustments to the lineup." Everyone leaned in. She smiled sweetly, then turned to me and dropped the bomb with surgical precision. "Bree, I've been thinking, I know we said you'd be my maid of honor, but I realize the bridal aesthetic I'm going for is very ethereal, very sleek and symmetrical. And, well, I just don't think you fit that look." There was a pause, long, heavy. I stared at her. "I don't fit the look." "You know what I mean?" she said, twirling her straw. "You're gorgeous in your own way, obviously. But the vibe is very specific, minimal, sharp angles, blonde and brunette balance. You understand, right?" She was smiling, like this was a reasonable explanation, like I wasn't being dissected and discarded in real time. "So, what are you saying?" I asked slowly. "I'm saying," she took a breath, "you'd still be at the wedding, of course, just not in the wedding. Maybe you could help manage the schedule or coordinate vendors. You're amazing at spreadsheets." I blinked. My heart pounded. I looked around the table. None of the bridesmaids looked surprised. A few even looked relieved. She had planned this. This wasn't a last-minute change. This was a carefully staged announcement, dressed up as brunch, a public demotion to avoid a private confrontation. "I see," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Lauren reached over and squeezed my hand like she was doing me a favor. "You're the most important person in my life, Bree. You know that." I pulled my hand away. I didn't cry. Not then. Not in front of them. I sat through the rest of that ridiculous meal with my back straight, my lips tight, and my mind racing. When I got to my car, I didn't start the engine. I just sat there staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror, hearing her voice again and again. "You don't fit the aesthetic. You're great with spreadsheets." That night, I opened the wedding folder on my laptop and stared at all the work I had done. The vendor list, the floral contracts, the catering emails, the finalized venue confirmation at Windrose Estate, the one I had recommended and personally booked under her name because I had a connection through an old college friend. And then, a different voice in my head, sharper, colder, whispered, "She doesn't think you're pretty enough to stand beside her, but she sure used your pretty connections to build this entire event." I stared at the venue name, Windrose Estate, booked, paid in part, reserved under her wedding planner's name, but technically still under the business license I had created when planning to start my own event company years ago. I clicked the file, and that's when the seed was planted. This wasn't going to end with tears. It was going to end with fireworks. And I would be holding the match. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running every moment of that brunch through my head like a broken reel. Every fake smile, every sideways glance from Lauren's perfect little army of bridesmaids, every word of that knife-edged dismissal. She had rehearsed it, no doubt. Probably practiced it with Megan and Claire, the blonde twins with the matching jawlines who giggled when she made that sharp angles comment. The more I replayed it, the clearer everything became. This wasn't just about aesthetics, it was about erasing me. Lauren wanted the spotlight so badly, she couldn't risk having anyone on stage who might remind people that she didn't get there alone. Not even her own sister. The next morning, I made myself coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened up my laptop again. The Windrose Estate contract blinked back at me, unsigned. Technically, I had already paid the reservation deposit under my consulting company's business license. It was meant to save Lauren money and give me a solid case study when I launched my event planning firm. I'd done it with her blessing months ago, back when I still thought she wanted me by her side. The venue contract hadn't been finalized yet because the final balance was due next week. Lauren thought her planner had handled it, but her planner had used my name, my registration, and my email as the point of contact. I had asked her to. It was easier that way, back when I thought family was forever. Now it was leverage. I reached out to Marcy, my old college roommate who worked at Windrose. "Hey, do me a favor?" I texted her. "Don't process that final payment on the Holloway wedding just yet. There's a change in plans." Her reply came back instantly. "Of course. You okay?" I stared at those words longer than I should have. Was I okay? Not yet, but I would be. I started digging into every detail I had organized for Lauren's wedding, and the deeper I went, the more I realized how little she had actually done. The vision board, mine. The menu, drafted by me and the caterer after Lauren ignored all the sample tastings. The guest seating plan? I had spent hours working around her estranged cousins and bitter aunts. Even the dress-fitting appointments had been set by me. And yet she had the audacity to toss me aside because I didn't look like her Instagram friends. It wasn't just betrayal, it was erasure. And I wasn't about to disappear quietly. That afternoon, I met with Leah, an executive event planner from a major PR firm, who had once offered to partner with me before I stepped back to help with family. I brought her my original wedding plans. She was impressed. "Why haven't you launched your firm yet?" she asked. I didn't answer. I was too busy watching a new plan take shape. I spent the next week rebranding the entire event planning business I had shelved years ago. I built the website, curated the portfolio using Lauren's wedding plans as the flagship case study, without using her name, and quietly booked Windrose Estate for a new client. A client named Bree and Company. Under my name, for an exclusive partnership with Leah's PR agency for a future gala. Legally, nothing Lauren had planned could move forward without my signature, and she had no idea. But she would, because 2 days before her final walkthrough at Windrose, I received an email from her planner. "Hi Bree, just confirming the walkthrough this Friday with the bride and venue staff. All vendor checks are still pending final authorization. Please sign off and return the form by Thursday at noon." I didn't reply. Instead, I booked a solo tour of the venue on Thursday morning, just me and Marcy, and had the paperwork signed over to my name, finalizing the contract and removing the Holloway wedding from the calendar. All perfectly legal. When Lauren called me that afternoon, she was in a panic. Why is Windrose saying the wedding is canceled? I let the silence settle between us like fog. They're not canceling, I said. They're honoring the contract holder, which is me. You're joking, she snapped. You're not seriously? You wouldn't. I would, I replied. And I have. The explosion came fast. You're ruining my wedding because I made one little change? No, I said calmly. You're losing your wedding because you decided your sister wasn't pretty enough to stand beside you after she built everything you have. I was just being honest. And so am I. I own the venue now, and I won't be lending it out to people who think I belong behind a spreadsheet. Click. She didn't call back. Not that day. But my inbox? It lit up with messages from relatives, friends, even her bridesmaids. Some demanding answers, some begging me to reconsider. I ignored them all. This wasn't about petty revenge. It was about reclaiming space in a life where I had been pushed to the edge for far too long. And I wasn't done yet. The messages didn't stop for days. First came the bridesmaids, Claire and Megan, of course, trying to play peacemakers. Bree, I know Lauren hurt your feelings, but this is her big day. Don't ruin it over a dumb comment. She didn't mean it that way. You're twisting her words. But I wasn't twisting anything. I remembered exactly how she said it. That fake sweet voice. The way she reached for my hand like she was doing me a favor. I had played that scene in my mind like a clip from a movie. Every time I doubted myself, I replayed it again and again. And the fire returned. Then came the guilt trips from our relatives. My Aunt Carol even left a voicemail crying about how she'd already bought a dress and booked a flight. But none of them had reached out to ask how I felt when my sister humiliated me at that table. Not one. Lauren didn't call again, not directly. But a few days later, I received an email. It wasn't long, just 5 lines. Bree, I can't believe you'd do this to me. You've always been jealous, and now you've made that clear to everyone. I hope ruining my wedding was worth it. Lauren, I read it once, then twice. Jealous. That word hit me like a slap. Because for years, I was jealous of how effortlessly she attracted attention, of the way she walked into a room and people made space for her. But I never hated her for it. I admired her. I helped her. I made myself small so she could shine. And when it was finally my turn to stand beside her, she pushed me into the shadows again. Not anymore. The weekend before her now-canceled wedding, I launched the website for my event company, Iron Lace Events, named for the strength it takes to be feminine and unbreakable at the same time. I posted sneak peeks of the Windrose venue setup, the floral vision board I'd created, and a few blurred-out mock invitations. It went viral in our circle within hours. Brides-to-be, influencers, even wedding blogs reached out asking for more. My inbox exploded with inquiries. And then something unexpected happened. Ryan reached out. Yes, Lauren's fiancé. He emailed me late at night. Just one sentence. Can we talk? I didn't answer immediately. I wasn't sure I wanted to. But curiosity won. We met at a coffee shop 3 days later. He looked tired, and not in a pre-wedding stress kind of way, more like a man who had seen something he couldn't unsee. She's been unbearable, he said without even sitting down. The way she talks about you, the way she treats people, I didn't see it before. Or maybe I didn't want to. I sipped my tea, unsure where this was going. She told me you sabotaged the wedding out of spite, he continued, but I read the old email threads, the receipts. You built this wedding from scratch. Without you, there was nothing. I didn't say anything. And there's more, he said, glancing away. She was already looking at alternate venues behind your back weeks before she told you about the aesthetic change. She said you were too controlling, too plain to match her bridal energy, that she didn't want people assuming we were twins, and it'd mess with her photos. That broke something in me, because while Lauren had insulted me to my face, hearing what she said behind my back, knowing that the betrayal had started even earlier, it twisted the knife deeper. Ryan leaned forward. "I'm calling off the wedding." I blinked. "What?" "She's not who I thought she was," he said. "And I think you just gave me the wake-up call I needed." He stood, nodded once, and left. And that's when the reality hit me. Not only had I taken back my dignity, but I had just saved him from marrying someone who only saw people as props in her personal spotlight. It wasn't just revenge, it was rescue. And when Lauren found out, she didn't scream. She didn't beg. She didn't even lash out. She went silent. For someone like her, that silence was more deafening than any tantrum. A week later, I received a final message. Not from her, but from our mother. "You humiliated your sister. She's heartbroken. I hope you're proud." And I replied, "I'm not proud of what I did. I'm proud of what I didn't let her do to me." Then I blocked the number. Because this wasn't about winning anymore. This was about reclaiming everything I had given up trying to belong. And from that moment on, I didn't shrink anymore. I stood tall, in heels, in boardrooms, in every room she once told me I didn't belong in, and built a business, a life, and a legacy she would never be able to erase. And every bride who walks down the aisle at Windrose now, they walk in my venue, not hers. Windrose Estate had always carried a kind of whispered royalty in the local wedding world. Brides didn't just get married there, they arrived. It was the kind of venue Lauren used to say was made for girls like her, with its sprawling lawns, arched stone entryways, and chandeliers that looked like frozen fireworks. She'd spoken about it since high school, planning imaginary dream weddings before she even had a boyfriend. And now, the venue was booked, but not for her. Instead of applause and cameras, her name was met with questions and confusion. The cancellations spread quietly at first. Muffled texts between bridesmaids, group chats where people asked why the Holloway wedding was scrubbed from the Windrose calendar. But gossip travels faster than truth, and it didn't take long before the silence around the missing event became its own kind of scandal. Some tried to save face. Megan posted a vague story on Instagram. Some people just don't know how to be happy for others. Another girl reposted the same story with a broken heart emoji, but the likes were low, the support was lukewarm, and the truth was getting louder. The truth was that Lauren hadn't just lost her venue. She had lost me, the sister who built her dream from the ground up while she posed for selfies in white. And now that I had stopped holding up the walls, everything she built was beginning to fall. Jasmine, the only bridesmaid who had ever actually gotten to know me outside of Lauren's curated universe, messaged me one evening. Her message was soft but honest. "She's falling apart, Bree. She's blaming everyone, crying in group chats, but never taking responsibility. You were always the one keeping her glued together. Without you, she's flailing." Flailing. A word I'd never imagined applying to my sister. She used to be so composed, so sharp. Even her lies were delivered with precision. Now, her edges were fraying. I scrolled past an Instagram photo she'd posted, an old shot from her engagement shoot at Windrose, clearly reused. The caption read, "A reminder that real beauty never needs approval." The comments were flooded with support, but half of them were private accounts with no pictures. I suspected most were fake. She was trying to control the narrative, but everyone who mattered knew. And the irony? I never wanted to be the villain in her story. I only wanted to matter. But once I stopped asking for a place in her life, I found one in my own. The very next week, I launched Iron Lace events with a full showcase, photos, testimonials, a time-lapse reel of Windrose's layout transformation, with elegant music underneath. I posted behind-the-scenes moments from planning meetings, highlighting the detail, the vision, the personalization. Within 48 hours, the post had been shared nearly 1,000 times. I woke up to emails from bridal publications, influencers, even a high-end event designer in LA asking for a consult. I wasn't just rising, I was soaring. And that's when I got the unexpected email from Ryan. Just 5 words. "Can we please talk? Ryan." I waited 2 days before responding. Not out of spite, but because I needed to ask myself if I really cared to hear his side. When we finally met, just outside a tucked-away cafe that Lauren would have called tragically off-brand, he looked like a man who hadn't slept in a month, disheveled, unsure, carrying a storm behind tired eyes. "I didn't know what she was really like," he said without preamble. "I don't know how I missed it. Or maybe I just let her paint over the cracks." I didn't interrupt. I let him speak. "She said you were ruining everything out of jealousy," he added. "But then I found the emails, the receipts. Your name was everywhere. Your fingerprints were all over every good thing about that wedding." I realized it was never her dream, it was yours, and she stole it. A slow, suffocating silence settled between us. Then he said the thing I didn't expect. "I broke it off. Officially. Yesterday." I blinked. Because of what happened? He looked at me, and for once, I saw sincerity in his eyes. Because I started seeing how she talks about people, especially the ones closest to her. You're not the first she's stepped on, just the first who ever stood up. I didn't respond right away. What was there to say? When he finally left, I stood in that alleyway for what felt like hours, staring at the cracked pavement, thinking of how many pieces I had once been shattered into, just to keep her whole. That night, I received a single text from Lauren. No emoji, no drama. "You win." But I didn't reply, because this wasn't a game. I didn't want to win her wedding. I wanted to win myself back. And I had. The thing no one tells you about revenge is this: it doesn't come with closure. The applause fades, the headlines vanish, even the gasps, the gossip, the stunned expressions from those who once looked down on you, they become whispers behind doors you no longer care to knock on. In the weeks after Ryan called off the wedding, my world changed fast. My inbox overflowed with client requests. Planners I used to dream of working with were now asking to collaborate. Iron Lace Events was featured in Bridal Influence, a major industry publication that praised the company for redefining what resilience looks like under lace and linen. People started calling me things like visionary and inspiring. I smiled. I thanked them. But inside, I wasn't celebrating. I was grieving. Not for Lauren, exactly, but for the sister I had wanted her to be. For the version of us that never really existed, except in my mind. In childhood sleepovers and make-believe weddings with pillowcase veils. I remembered our giggles, our whispered promises of growing up and planning each other's big days. At one point, that was real. Before the image came first. Before her friends became more important than my presence. Before she called me not pretty enough to stand beside her. I'd built something remarkable, but it came from something broken. And the cracks still ached. Then something happened that shook me in a different way. I received a letter, handwritten, no return address, just a soft ivory envelope slipped under the door of my office. Inside were only 2 things: a check for $15,000, a note that said, "Use this to give someone else a day they'll never forget." No names, just change one life. I sat at my desk for hours, staring at the letter. Who had sent it? Ryan? One of the vendors who had watched me quietly rebuild from Lauren's ashes? Or someone anonymous who saw in me something bigger than revenge? But it wasn't the money that haunted me. It was the last line. Just change one life. For weeks, I had been changing mine, reclaiming what was stolen, restoring dignity in places I had let others erase me. But what if this wasn't supposed to end with me? What if the truest form of revenge wasn't a headline? What if it was healing? That's when I decided I would use the money to plan a wedding for someone who had been told, "You're not enough." A woman like me, forgotten, cast aside, maybe even broken. I began asking quietly, A local women's shelter, a counselor I knew. I said, "Tell me if there's someone who needs a miracle, and I'll build it." Within a week, they found her. Her name was Mariah. She'd fled an abusive relationship with 2 kids, worked 3 jobs, and had been engaged to a kind man who waited patiently while she rebuilt her life. They were going to get married at City Hall because they couldn't afford anything else. No photos, no guests, no celebration, just a paper and a promise. I invited her to my office under the guise of an anonymous giveaway. When I showed her the plans, the dress fittings, the venue layout I had sketched myself, she burst into tears and said, "No one's ever chosen me before." That's when I knew. This was the closure I'd never find in Lauren's silence. This was what it meant to rise, not just from spite, but with grace. I designed the entire event myself. White peonies, hand-woven arches, gold-foiled invitations with her children's initials hidden in the corners. Every detail was wrapped in intention, not to impress, but to honor. When the day arrived, Mariah walked down the aisle in a simple silk gown. Her kids held her veil. Her husband cried before the music even started. And me? I stood in the back row, quiet, anonymous. I didn't need applause. I didn't need to be center stage anymore. I had been the bridesmaid once denied a seat at the altar. Now I was the architect behind a love story that would ripple for generations. And that was the moment I knew I had finally won. Not because Lauren lost, but because I became the woman she never imagined I could be. Not pretty enough for her wedding, but powerful enough to rewrite the ending. Months passed. Mariah's wedding became more than a success. It became a story. Word spread, not because I promoted it, but because people felt it. A woman who had been cast aside was celebrated like royalty. Her children laughed in flower crowns. Her husband held her hand like it was the first and last day of their lives. No influencer tag, no sponsorships, just a day filled with truth. That story found its way into a local magazine. The feature piece was titled "The Wedding That Love Built." And while the bride wasn't a celebrity and I wasn't mentioned by name, something about it caught fire. It ended up being shared in a national wedding blog. And that's how Lauren found it. I didn't know this at first, but one afternoon, I walked into a cafe, sat at the corner window as usual with my laptop, and saw her reflection in the glass before I even turned around. Lauren, hair darker now, thinner. She wore no makeup, and for the first time in my life, she looked unsure of herself. "Can I sit?" she asked softly. I nodded, not because I wanted to talk, but because after everything, I wasn't afraid anymore. She sat across from me and stared at her hands, like she couldn't figure out what to do with them. "I saw the wedding," she whispered. "Mariah's." I stayed silent. "I cried when I read it," she added. "Not because of what you did, but because of what I didn't." That stopped me cold. She looked up at me then, and her eyes weren't filled with pride or fury like before. They were glassy, humble, human. "You did something beautiful, and I don't think I ever told you that you were capable of it. I thought being pretty, being admired, was the same as being powerful. But watching you build something that heals people," she shook her head, "that was never in my script." I folded my arms and leaned back. "What do you want from me, Lauren?" She flinched, then looked down again. "Nothing," she said. "I just needed you to know you were always the better sister. I just didn't see it until you stopped needing me to." There was a silence between us that stretched like thread. I thought of the girl who once told me I couldn't stand beside her, the girl who had everything handed to her and still took from others. And yet, in that moment, she was just a woman trying to apologize. I didn't forgive her, not entirely, not yet, but I nodded. And for the first time in years, that was enough. She stood to leave, pausing only to say, "By the way, Ryan told me about the day you met, about how you didn't gloat, about how you said nothing when you could have said everything." That's when I realized I lost something that had nothing to do with him. I lost the last person who ever believed in me when no one else did. She walked out the door without waiting for a response. And I never saw her again, but I didn't need to, because the final twist wasn't about Lauren falling. It was about me rising. Not as a shadow, not as a supporting character, not as someone waiting for permission to shine, but as a woman who stood exactly where she was told she didn't belong, and built something so radiant that even the ones who once rejected her had to pause and see. The cafe meeting with Lauren left a quiet echo in my life, not heavy like a storm, but more like the distant sound of something that had finally stopped crashing. And when the silence came, I didn't fill it with noise. I filled it with building. Iron Lace events continued to flourish. We weren't just local anymore. Destination weddings, high-profile clients, even a request from a boutique hotel in Italy asking if I would consider creative directing a season of luxury elopements on their coast. I was booked out for the next year. My waiting list was longer than most brides' engagements. But it was never about the business for me. Not really. Every time a new client cried at their final dress fitting, every time a father hugged his daughter under a floral arch, every time someone told me, "You made me feel worthy," I felt something inside me settle. I hadn't just built a brand. I had built a home for women like me, the underestimated, the overlooked, the not quite pretty enoughs. Then came an email that made my fingers freeze on the keyboard. Subject line, "Partnership Proposal, Holloway Institute for Hospitality and Events." At first, I thought it was a mistake. Holloway, as in Lauren's legacy, her family's private event institute that had always been a high society pipeline. The same place that once told me, indirectly through my sister, that I wasn't polished enough for their referral list. The email was from the new director, not Lauren, not her parents. Apparently, they had been following my work for months. Apparently, my story, the real one, had reached board members, alumni, even potential donors. And now, the Holloway Institute wanted me to return, not as a guest speaker, but as an executive creative consultant to help modernize their outdated programming and train the next generation of planners in resilience, design, and ethical storytelling. They wanted me to shape the minds of future wedding visionaries. I laughed, not bitterly, but in that stunned, breathless way people laugh when the impossible suddenly walks up and offers them a key to a door they were once locked out of. The irony? Lauren had once begged to be accepted as an instructor there. She'd used her family's name, her network, even her press coverage. She'd been denied. And now the same board that overlooked me when I was just a little sister with a clipboard wanted me to write the curriculum. I stared at the screen for hours. Would accepting this offer mean I'd be tethered to her world again? Would it open old wounds? Or would it be the final act of power, walking back into the castle that once turned me away and claiming it with my name on the door? I closed my eyes and pictured it. Me, standing at the front of a lecture hall, surrounded by young women with notebooks and open hearts, teaching them that elegance wasn't just a floral budget, that being seen wasn't about symmetry, that no one, ever again, would be made to feel like the background character at their own story. Maybe this was never about revenge. Maybe this was about making sure no one else had to be broken first, just to be taken seriously. The next morning I clicked reply. Let's begin. Walking into the Holloway Institute felt like stepping into an old memory wrapped in glass. Beautiful, distant, and breakable. The building hadn't changed. Still marble floors and that faint scent of lilies that always reminded me of ceremonies and silence. But this time my badge didn't say guest. It said Director of Creative Programs. It still felt surreal. The receptionist, a young woman named Eliza, smiled at me with wide eyes like I was some celebrity. "We're all so excited you're here, Ms. Holloway." Ms. Holloway? How strange it felt to hear that name now, not as a reflection of my sister, but as my own authority, my own legacy. The first few weeks were filled with workshops, strategy meetings, mentorship sessions. Students hung on my every word, and not because I was polished or poised like Lauren used to be. They listened because I spoke with truth and vulnerability, and because I never once pretended to be untouchable. But the ghosts were still here. Whispers in hallways, professors who glanced too quickly, alumni who blinked a little too long when they realized which Holloway I was. It didn't bother me. I had learned long ago how to carry my name without apologizing. Until I found the letter. It happened by accident. I had stayed late one evening to prepare for a panel. I wandered into the archive room, an old, rarely used wing of the building where curriculum documents, instructor profiles, and donor letters were kept in delicate file drawers and scanned into dusty drives. I was looking for old course outlines, but what I found was a folder labeled Holloway Internal, 2019 to 2021, Instructor Submissions and Denials. Out of curiosity, I opened it. And there it was, Lauren's name. I paused. Her application had been handwritten, her signature at the bottom bold and confident, her bio read like a magazine profile, award-winning, trend-setting, beloved. And yet, there, in red ink at the bottom of the page, were the words, "Concerns raised regarding integrity of past event portfolios. Multiple references contacted declined to endorse." Wait, integrity issues? I flipped to the next page. There were 3 emails from former vendors, ones I had worked with, ones who knew me. Portfolio images submitted by Lauren Holloway appear to belong to a different designer. We can confirm Ms. Bree Holloway was lead coordinator and creative for these projects. Our endorsement lies with Bree. Lauren's involvement was surface level at best. I felt the room tilt. Lauren had tried to submit my work as her own. And she'd been caught. Not only had she stolen credit back then, she tried to ride my success again, even after the betrayal. And the Institute had quietly buried it, denied her, pretended it never happened. But no one ever told me. They had watched me rise, carrying the weight of being the forgotten sister, when the truth had already been acknowledged, just not shared. I sat there for what felt like an hour, frozen, reading the same 3 lines over and over. Part of me burned with anger. Another part grieved, again. Because Lauren didn't just want to exclude me from her wedding. She wanted to erase me from her story, even after I gave her everything. I could have gone public. I could have leaked the files. But I didn't. I closed the folder, filed it back, because I didn't need to destroy her to be seen. I already had everything she had tried to steal, my reputation, my career, my dignity, and she had nothing left to take. Instead, I used the truth as fuel, not for revenge, but for something greater. The next morning, I rewrote the curriculum for the mentorship program. I added a unit called Creative Ethics in Event Design, and I told the girls, without naming names, the story of how easily power can tempt people to manipulate, steal, and erase. I taught them how to hold the pen in their own stories, because sometimes the best revenge isn't a confrontation. It's building a legacy so solid no one can lie their way into it. I thought I had reached the end of Lauren's shadow, but the universe has a way of folding stories in layers. Right when you believe the chapter is closed, another page curls open. It came through a voicemail, an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something in me, maybe instinct, maybe exhaustion, pressed play. The voice was unfamiliar, soft, and weary. "Hi, this is Maggie. I'm not sure if you remember me." I was Lauren's therapist. I know I'm not supposed to call, but something's been on my conscience. And I thought, if you're the woman I think you are, maybe you'll want to know. I sat straight up. Therapist? She continued. Lauren came to me a few months before her wedding. She was angry, sure, but also afraid. She talked about you a lot, about how you'd outgrown her, about how everyone liked you more when they actually saw you. She said she felt invisible next to you, that she hated how kind you were. Because people remembered kindness, but no one remembers perfect. My heart slowed. She told me she excluded you from her wedding because she was terrified. Terrified you'd shine brighter on her day than she ever could. And she said, if she stands next to me in those photos, no one will see me. They'll only see her. I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. The message kept playing. She also said, the day she told you that you weren't pretty enough, you didn't argue, you didn't beg. And that scared her more than anything because it meant she didn't have power over you anymore. There was a pause. Then Maggie added, I'm sorry if this brings more pain, but I thought maybe, just maybe you'd want to know that your sister didn't hate you. She envied you, loved you, feared you, all at once. And that kind of storm can turn anyone into someone unrecognizable. The message ended. I sat frozen for a long time. Because the version of Lauren I had battled in my head all these years, the villain, the narcissist, the heartless sister, suddenly looked small, fragile, human, not innocent. Number the pain she caused was real. But now I saw it for what it was. Not superiority, but terror. Terror that I had bloomed while she wilted. Terror that her beauty had an expiration date, and mine was still rising. Terror that no matter how perfectly she planned, she could never control how others felt about me. I stared at my reflection in the window that night, and for the first time, I didn't feel like the girl fighting for space in her sister's world. I felt like the woman who had finally stepped out of the frame completely and built her own masterpiece. But the message left me with a question I couldn't shake. If Lauren's cruelty came from fear, was it possible that her apology that day in the cafe had been genuine? And if so, was there still something left of her I could forgive? The message from Lauren's therapist echoed in my ears for days. I didn't tell anyone about it, not my assistant, not my closest friend Mariah, not even the new interns who looked at me like I was invincible. Because that voicemail had cracked something inside me I wasn't ready to show. Lauren hadn't just envied me. She had been afraid of me, afraid of being next to someone she knew would outlast her. And suddenly, every bitter word, every exclusion, every moment she tried to cut me down made sense. Not as an act of dominance, but desperation. The woman I had built my armor against was drowning in a storm of her own making. And here I was, miles away from her, in a penthouse office lined with whiteboards full of campaigns, client dreams, and workshops titled Rewriting Your Role. My name was etched in gold on the glass door, not hers, mine. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived at my office. Handwritten, no return address. I almost threw it away. But something, that same inner stillness that had helped me through the worst, urged me to open it. It was from Lauren. Bree, I don't know how to say this without sounding like I'm asking for something I don't deserve. I've watched everything you've done. I saw the article, the institute, the weddings, and I know now that I never had power. I had attention. That's different. You always had power, the kind that comes from people trusting you, from loving you because you see them, not because they want to be you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I do want to say, I'm sorry. I knew you were the one they'd remember, so I tried to erase you before they had the chance. But they remembered you anyway, and so will I. Lauren. I held the letter to my chest. It didn't fix anything. It didn't undo years of being sidelined, of being whispered about, of sitting alone while she sparkled. But it did something else. It gave me the last word, without ever needing to speak it. That weekend, I stood in front of a packed auditorium of young women, daughters, dreamers, survivors, and I told them the truth. Not about Lauren, about me. I told them how rejection can sound like love wearing the wrong voice. How sometimes the people who hurt us most don't hate us. They fear the mirror we hold up to their own lack. And I told them this: you do not need to destroy anyone to rise. You just need to stop waiting for someone to choose you. Choose yourself, and the world will follow. The room erupted, not in noise, in tears, in silence, in awe. I left that stage not as the sister who was never chosen, but as the woman who chose everything for herself. I never responded to Lauren's letter, because some stories don't need an encore. They need a graceful curtain fall. And mine? It ended exactly the way I wrote it, on my own terms.